This episode of the podcast is brought to you by New Bloom Labs.
Hey, cannabis producers. Have you ever found yourself waiting 1 to 2 or even 3 weeks for a full panel analysis of your cannabis products? If so, I think we can both agree that that is completely unacceptable. Let me tell you about the team at New Bloom Labs. New Bloom Labs tests plant material for potency monitoring, full panel analysis, and official state compliance testing. The company has locations in Tennessee and Texas, and more to come soon. New Bloom always provides next business day turnaround on potency tests and 1 to 2 business day turnaround on most toxin screenings. They're ISO certified and DEA registered, so you know their science is first rate. Most cannabis producers are frustrated with their third-party labs, but you don't have to be. Call New Bloom Labs at 844-TEST-CBD or visit their website at newbloomlabs.com. Superior science, rapid results, New Bloom Labs.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our friends at Regrow.
Are you a cannabis company searching for a strategic business partner to help you automate your business, scale effectively, and make the supply chain work for you? If you said yes to any of these, then you need to know about Regrow. Regrow is the first of its kind software that leverages components of leading ERP and supply chain systems with the necessary compliance of the cannabis industry. Compared to other software systems on the market, when you choose Regrow as a strategic business partner, you get all aspects of regulatory compliance built in, with the added value of workforce management, inventory, SOP management, and reporting and metrics that allow for companies to scale successfully. Every cannabis company has its own unique needs, and one size definitely does not fit all. Visit Regrow's website at www.regrow.io. That's www.regrow.io. Designed by software experts passionate about cannabis and the success of the industry, Regrow is the premier cloud-based cannabis supply chain management system. Hello everyone, Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Skye Pinnick, Chief Marketing Officer at C21 Investments. And there we go. We're on.
All right.
Guy, how are you doing today, man?
Most excellent, man. I'm just looking outside at a bright and sunny day here in Central Oregon at the mountains all snow covered, and pretty excited for this time of year.
Man, I need to get to Oregon at some point. My aunt lives out in Portland, but I mean, even just the city of Portland, when I was there 10 years ago, it's amazing because you've got kind of everything. You've got the city, you've got the beautiful landscape, you got the water, the rolling hills, right? I mean, it's just kind of it's a unique place for sure.
It is. It's super beautiful, and Portland is just such a cool, awesome city that's got a really amazing craft culture, and everybody's into beer and weed and making cool stuff. So it's a really cool place. And then where I live on the other side of the mountains, like luckily the Cascade Mountains are a great rain screen. So all the precipitation is on the west side of the mountains. I live on the east side, where we get 300 days of sun, and it's a completely different environment. But Bend's this like cool little resort town that's kind of hustling and bustling, tucked away out in the mountains.
Wow. Is it pretty popular in terms of like an area for cultivation or?
Yeah, it actually kind of is. So we're in the high desert. We're at about 3,600 feet here. So we are kind of high and dry, and ironically that's creates a really fantastic environment for cultivating cannabis.
Yeah.
Just that dry humidity. We don't really have a lot of humidity related issues. So pretty cool.
Right. I would imagine. I mean, Oregon is just booming when it comes to their cannabis businesses and whatnot. And so for those listening, I just want to set the stage. I have Skye Pinnick on. He's the CMO at C21 Investments, which is a vertically integrated cannabis company that cultivates, processes, and distributes quality cannabis and hemp-derived consumer products in the U.S. Now, Skye, I know that you guys primarily kind of focus and operate right now within Nevada and is it Oregon, right? Of course. So
Yep.
those are the two primary states. So why don't you tell us a little bit first about your background, Sky, and how you kind of found your way into the cannabis industry?
Yeah, sure. So, I think, having listened to many of your podcasts, I think there's kind of common threads with a lot of the people you interview, where some people are coming at it from, being entrenched in cannabis, for their whole life, and then sort of the other camp is those who saw opportunity and in a fun, way to join an emerging market. And I'm sort of in the latter camp there. I wasn't a cannabis consumer growing up. I've been surrounded around it, of course. Just living in Oregon, it's pretty wired into the DNA of this state and a lot of people who live here. So I'm certainly have been around it for a long time, but it wasn't until about 10 years ago where a couple friends of mine that have been cannabis cultivators for a long time, we sort of got together and we were looking at, the transition from the medical market to what was going to be the emerging recreational market. And, we kind of put our heads together over a couple beers on a beach in Nicaragua surfing and said, hey, there's an opportunity here. And so it was sort of pairing, cannabis legacy knowledge and expertise with, sort of my business brain, if you will. And it's pretty easy to do that when it's a couple good buddies and you sort of complement each other and you've got a long historical relationship. So it's like, oh, hey, I can do this part and you can do that part, and hey, there might be something to do here.
Right. And so
Yeah.
10 years ago, so okay, that 2010, so I mean, at that point, was Oregon medical? Were they talking about being medical? Like what was the landscape in Oregon at the time?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's a great sort of deeper dive into it. So it was definitely medical at the time, and what my friends who were cultivators, what they were doing is they had a small grow that they were cultivating for medical patients, and this recreational cannabis was way out on the horizon, but it was moving that direction. And so they kind of came to me because they wanted to expand, and they needed someone who was capable of purchasing property and some kind of like dealing with the I call it kind of the more grown up parts of the business. And so they asked me to help there, and my goal was just to be a silent partner, not even really a partner, just the real estate investor that just helps these guys do stuff. And in that process, it was like, oh, well, I can actually help you guys get the licenses and permits because it's the language I speak. I'm used to dealing with stuff like that. And so we kind of just kept evolving the process. And as that was happening, the recreational sort of opportunity and landscape continued to mature. And that got my entrepreneurial brain really spinning. And so I started doing a ton of research into that. We were reaching out to our state legislators, our governor, et cetera, and kind of trying to, put our finger on the pulse of which way things were going. Yeah. And as soon as I saw that it was going to happen, it was just a matter of time. That's sort of when I went, okay, this is real. This is something that's going to be, could be a game changer. And so I leaned in pretty heavy at that point, and that's when we really started to accelerate our plans for cultivation.
That's awesome. So outside of like your initial, the initial appeal from an entrepreneur perspective, right? You see this huge opportunity, especially with the pace of how fast Oregon moved, right? When you kind of saw that recreation was on the horizon. Was there any other appeal when you kind of really got into the industry in terms of like consumption? I mean, like, did you end up like having any epiphanies like, oh, I get it. Okay, now that I'm consuming or trying it, edibles, whatever it is, I get the appeal. Did you ever have those epiphanies?
I think the thing that was really exciting to me was an epiphany in sort of a different camp. So I'm a lifelong marketer, advertiser. My day job, if you will, I'm a commercial film producer and or commercial producer for TV commercials. And so I've been working on building brands and helping tell brand story for the last 20, 25 years. And so that's what's fascinating to me is the power of brand.
Mhm.
And what I saw then was the convergence and the crossroads of an opportunity to, in a nascent industry, in an emerging market where things are just going crazy. It's like, holy cow, this is effectively rewind the clock back to, the late 1920s and the end of the alcohol prohibition. And man, if you could be, Mr. Daniels or Mr. Beam or, any major alcohol brand you consider today, if you could be on the forefront of that at that sort of transitional and pivotal, time,
Yeah.
that's an incredible opportunity that probably will only ever happen once in a lifetime or in multiple generations. And so what fascinated me, the epiphany light bulb moment was, holy cow, if I can put the same energy that I've been putting into building brands for major companies, for the last 20 years, if I could put that into something that I own in a space that, maybe people 10, 15 years my senior are a little more apprehensive of getting into. I've always said I've kind of been at the right convergence, the crossroads of, age, experience, and sort of, fiscal ability to participate. And because of all that, I was like, oh, man, this is it. This is the place to like really go and make a mark. And, am I part of a brand that will, still be around in 100 years? I don't know, but it's sure worth trying at this point.
Sure.
So
We're
that to me, that opportunity was the real catalyst to get excited, and then the epiphany of sort of, or the understanding of the product and what it meant. Holy crap. That was one of the biggest eye openers to me, because for my entire history in understanding cannabis, it wasn't, for one, it was never called cannabis. That's the adult term,
right. And that's
right?
why I continually push that term. I don't want to use the other term, because it's a demonizing term, right? It's there's stigma attached with that. It's yeah,
Totally. I mean, yeah, it's always been weed or pot. It's funny, but
yeah.
that's what it always was. And to me, weed was always just sold in a bag from some person, right, in some shady corner, from the guy down the hall in the dorm, or whatever the case may be, right? But it's always just generic Acme brand or unbranded, just something green in a bag, right? You don't know if it's indica, sativa, if it has any CBD, anything. You were just looking at it like, does this have sticks and stems in it?
Yeah.
And seeds and
And all your what at the time was just does it get you high? It gets you high, right? I mean, because
yeah,
that was really it. That was kind of the focus. Yeah.
totally. And so that's what it always was to me, right? And I grew up as an athlete, so I kind of, steered clear of it just from a, sort of a performance,
Sport.
I was a swimmer.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah, among other things, but that was sort of my key thing. And so, if I'm spending 4 hours in the pool a day, working on, increasing my lung capacity and achieving peak physical fitness, it seemed a little counterproductive to be contradicting that with inhaling smoke. I think in today's environment, there's so many other ways to utilize the compound of THC, via, transdermal patch or a tincture or an edible. There's other ways. I was really concerned about my lungs at that time.
Right. You know what's interesting
Uh,
though is when you talk about those times when you just kind of got a bag and of course, like you said, today the landscape's different. You have topicals, you have edibles, you have different ways of consuming. There's still states today though that are kind of in that same position. I mean, Texas being one, obviously there's a lot more. I mean, there's a rapid amount of CBD products throughout the state of Texas, but of course, THC, it's not even a medical state at this point. We barely decriminalized. So
yeah.
there's people that are just starting from scratch in terms of even consuming the plant in different ways, or even
And I tell you, it's really fascinating living in a state where it's completely normalized here. It is completely destigmatized. I mean, just driving home today, I heard 3 ads for cannabis companies on the radio.
right.
Right? It's so normalized. Like, my partners and colleagues and employees, like, who have kids that are in, 6th grade or something, oh, what do your parents do? Oh, my dad's a cultivator for a weed company. And it's totally normal. It's just like saying, oh, my dad works at a brewery, or my dad's an attorney, or whatever. It's like normalized. And then when I travel, You go to a state like Texas, you go to some of these states where it's not normalized yet, where things are just, it's so commonplace here.
Yeah.
You go there and it's like, oh, right. Okay, it's still illegal here, and it's still, looked upon negatively. So it's kind of a fascinating time that we're in.
And that brings up a good point. So that's a good kind of pivot. So you mentioned, the landscape in Oregon and how, even as of 2010, you were thinking about this industry because the market was so mature and emerging so fast in Oregon. So what is it like operating in a state like Nevada, now that it's recently gone adult use?
Yeah, Nevada's man, that's our crown jewel. That is just the epicenter of what the C21 business is. And it's primarily because, we have a vertically integrated business there. We grow it, harvest it, sell it.
And
We make all of our products, and it's all self-contained.
is that Silver State Relief that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. And so we have two dispensaries. One just on the outskirts of Reno in the suburb called Sparks, and that's sort of our big dispensary there. And then we have one about 40 minutes north of there in Fernley. It's the only dispensary in that town, and so we have two dispensaries in Nevada.
And are one of those Planet 13? I mean, because I believe that's what's known as the locals, right?
So Planet 13 is in Las Vegas on the Strip, well, or off the Strip, and it's a different company that, it's their own
One
dispensary.
entity. Okay, yeah. Okay. So Silver State Relief is the company that y'all operate, and you have two dispensaries in Nevada at this point.
Correct. And then we have a grow that supports those dispensaries.
Got you. Okay. So tell me, like, I mean, it's your bread and butter. You're really happy with Nevada. So like, what's the market adoption been since the state went full adult use?
Oh, I mean, look, it's like everywhere. I feel like that once it goes rec, it's like there's lines out the door. People, I think it's great for consumers. It makes it safe. Especially, our facilities. I mean, we have huge, easy access parking lots. It's well lit. It's well organized. It's not that sort of the head shop that maybe you sort of envision as part of the legacy part of this industry. I mean, you walk into our Silver State dispensary in Reno, and it is a beautiful store. It's well lit. It's well organized. I think we have like 27 cash registers. So it's designed to move people through, make it as simple as possible, and as easily accessible to adults that are of age that can go through there. So our staff is well trained. They're very knowledgeable. They're friendly, and I mean it's just this very professional experience, which is, I think, to some folks who've been to dispensaries, maybe that's the experience they've had. I've been to my fair share of dispensaries just in market research and understanding the world. And I tell you that the disparity between dispensaries is huge. You can go into places where, it's sort of dark and dingy, and it's a little bit, like, I don't want to say scary, but it's like you feel like you're kind of rewinding the clock and going into a head shop where maybe someone's like, hey, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I got something in the back that you might be interested in.
Right.
And then you go to, our version of it, which is, it looks like it's just a beautiful retail store. And so it's just normalized.
Right. No, and that's something, again, that people who reside in Texas and other states where cannabis laws aren't friendly, that would be something where you're not familiar with, but I totally get it, right? You really want a good experience, especially if it's your first time as a customer entering into the cannabis market. You want to have that friendly, good experience, as opposed to like what you were talking about earlier, potentially, that feeling of like meeting, your dealer in an alley or something like that, right?
Yeah. And I think there's kind of another layer to that too, which is what's been fascinating. One of the fastest growing segments in the cannabis industry is, sort of that 45 plus consumer. And, it's the canna curious person who is most likely, there's a decent percentage of the population, of the adult population, that has had a cannabis experience at some point in their life. So, we see a lot of people that are what I call, they're coming back to cannabis, right? Maybe they experimented in college and, but then you get a job and then you start a family and you kind of don't have the guy down the dorm hallway anymore. You kind of start to, those connections fade and you just kind of grow up and become an adult, and it's less a part of your life, especially because it's been illegal.
Right.
And so what we have now is we have these 40-year-old people kind of coming back to cannabis because they're starting to learn all the medicinal benefits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're coming to dispensaries. They're walking through the door, and the last time they bought weed was from some guy down the street, right? In some awkward scenario or whatever.
Or their kids, or their
Yeah, totally. There's that happens a lot too. but so they've been separated from it. So now all of a sudden they're walking into a lively retail environment where you have a 25-year-old bud tender who's incredibly passionate about the product. They know all of the different terpene names, and they know the indica, sativa, and the ratios and the benefits and all this stuff. And so you have these people who are just incredibly excited to share that with someone who's either coming to cannabis for the first time, or the canna curious person coming back to it. And so from afar, I kind of witnessed these really engaging special moments where you get that 52-year-old person who's walking into a dispensary for their first time, and they're just like, oh, this is just like a normal store, this is great. And then they have an interaction with one of our trained bud tenders who they'll take the time and walk them through, explain, answer all the questions that they can, and then they conducted a typical retail business transaction. There's nothing shady about it. There's nothing, you're not looking over your shoulder or worried about anything. And it's like you're buying a packaged goods,
right,
that has the contents on it. It has the THC percentage. It has like all the details. It's been tested, third-party lab tested. So it's like a totally legit process and project or product. It's no different than going to a liquor store,
right,
and buying a bottle of Jim Beam off the shelf, and it's you don't have any doubt that that's actually what it says it is in the on the label, and that what you're paying for is legitimate, and you're not worried that someone's going to come arrest you when you walk out of the store. So
yeah, the labeling is a huge indicator of like the quality of the product, right? I mean, like standard things like the ingredients, but then also like that QR code that takes immediately to the certificate of analysis, so you can see that it's been tested for pesticides, mycotoxins, things like that.
Right.
All that's important. So as you explain that specific demographic, is there one particular demographic that you would say Silver State Relief like appeals to in the state of Nevada, or is it kind of across the board?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because I think, if you holistically think about the state of Nevada, I think anyone in their right mind, the first thing you think of is Las Vegas, right? I mean, it's literally the beaming light for the state. I think the Luxor is doing that, sending up the beacon to anyone. Anyway, so I think people naturally think about Las Vegas, and the first thing you think about in Vegas is it's completely tourism based. I mean, obviously a ton of people live there and work there in the industry, but it's the 40 or 50 million people that are traveling through Vegas on a annual basis. That, I mean, that's where the attraction is, right? And that's why you want to have a dispensary in Las Vegas, or a business in Las Vegas. But I think what's commonly overlooked is, just to the north in the state, in Reno, you have a smaller, economy, and you have the same sort of gaming component there. It's just on a smaller scale. But what we've done is we've captured a tremendous amount of just the locals, just the working person's dispensary. So our Silver State dispensary is not built on a tourism model in any way, shape, or form. Most of our customers are repeat customers. They come in weekly, every other day, every 2 weeks, or whatever the case may be. But it is the same customers. And I think what's a key thing to think about there is, in a sense, I'm not saying anyone's doing this, but in Las Vegas, it's just a turnstile, right? You're going to see a person come through go through your store, and you'll never see them again, or maybe 5 years later they come through again. But at our Silver State dispensary, I mean, Susan, who's mother of three, she's 42 years old. She comes on Tuesday. Well, guess what? She may come next Tuesday and the Tuesday after and the Tuesday after. And so I think what's fascinating about that is like we have a very real and approachable model there that people are comfortable with.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it makes sense, right? That approach. Everybody is so focused on the Las Vegas market, being that there's so many tourists worldwide that are visiting every day, right? Uh,
Right.
Obviously, not as much due to the COVID pandemic this year, but in any case, it's a very heavily trafficked city. But where you guys see the opportunity is, well, why don't we look local and start to serve the residents in these communities where there is still similar activity happening, but we can count on that repeat customer base, right?
Absolutely. And the thing that's interesting there too is that in that model, you're not just trying to capture a tourist's discretionary income on a what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas sort of weekend, right? Which is great. Don't get me wrong, it's a fantastic model, right? I mean, I've done it, you've probably done it, everyone's gone to Vegas. You've got an amount of money that you're sort of willing to leave in Las Vegas, and now, yeah, exactly. Whether it's wherever you're doing that at is up to you.
We're making it rain for those listening, making it rain. Yeah.
Making it rain. And so, in that sort of mindset, someone, landing in Las Vegas, going to a dispensary, like straight off the plane, and they're going to go and they're going to buy $100 vape pen, or some exotic strain of cannabis, especially if you're flying in from Texas, right? Where now all of a sudden you have access to something that you didn't have access to. But my point is, it's no different than paying $12 for a Bud Light in a bar in Las Vegas. You're going to pay a sort of tourist-based price for cannabis there. And what's different about our business model is that we're catering to literally kind of that local and repeat consumer base. And so our products are fairly priced. They're, it's meant to be designed so that people keep coming back.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we've had to, calibrate. So we're charging a reasonable price, which means if you don't have these exaggerated margins, you have to then really think about how you're managing your costs so that you can produce the product and still, run a business successfully.
I would imagine also, like with those two models compared to each other, the products that are consumed are probably a lot different. Like you mentioned, the tourist coming in has a fixed budget. They know how much they're spending, and typically they're going to probably go all out in terms of like buying a very high potent, pre-rolled joint, or something that because they're there to party basically, as opposed
Exactly.
to as opposed to a repeat customer that's coming in and getting their weekly or bi-weekly eighth, right, or ounce or half ounce. So
yeah, that's exactly it. And so if you have that repeat customer, you can't be charging them these exorbitant prices, because they're gonna go somewhere else.
right, yeah, no, that makes total sense. So two-part question here. One is, does C21 Investments have plans to expand outside of where they're currently operating in those two dispensaries in Nevada? And then also, like, what's the ultimate market share that y'all are aiming to capture in Nevada?
Yeah, sure. I mean, great question. So, I mean, absolutely, we have our sights on expansion. We just announced very very recently the expansion of our cultivation facility in Reno, in the Reno area. And so we're definitely sort of expanding upon our infrastructural foundation to accommodate our broader expansion plans. And so currently I think we have about 5% of the market share in Nevada, and which I think is pretty substantial given we're just in one sort of geographic region. And I think we're optimistic that we can continue to expand upon our model, and part of that's through cultivation. Eventually part of that will be through adding additional dispensaries to our network. and with sort of a goal of creeping up closer to that 15% of the market share in the state. So that's
5% market share, like you said, and just kind of one concentrated area. That's pretty impressive. That is, yeah.
I mean, I think so. I mean, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of our team for that. It's, you kind of look at comparables of other companies that are playing in the same space, and we're sort of a 100 or 120 million dollar market cap company, and represent 5% of the Nevada industry, compared to some of our peers who are billion-dollar market cap companies that have just slightly larger percentages. So I think we're dollar for dollar, we're doing a pretty good job.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and here's another question, even outside of Nevada, I mean, any future plans maybe to start thinking about some of the neighboring states that have become adult use, like, say Arizona and some of the other states that are on the ballots this January?
Yeah, we've always got our eyes on what's happening out there, and where the potential opportunities are. So we're not just focused on Nevada at the moment, because we don't have any vision greater than that. But our key focus over the last couple of years has just been to perfect our model in Nevada, and as a corporate entity, and really galvanize that foundation of our company before we start expanding. And so, for the last, we've kind of been working on these 4 pillars of our business. And, the first pillar was to sort of get our house in order. And what that means is, as a public company, so C21 acquired, several entities, the Silver State Relief business in Nevada, and a few assets in Oregon. And as you do that all sounds great. It's like, yeah, we're expanding, we acquired some companies. What people don't realize is, behind the scenes, you have to then integrate those companies and streamline them. I mean, that's the whole benefit of bringing these things together. Well, those things take time, and instead of having that be a side project and not sort of worrying about it, and then aggressively expanding and capturing more territory, so to speak, what we did is we're in this for the long haul. We're not trying to just be a flash in the pan and get out over our skis. Like, that's something we've been very cognizant of. And so first order of business was streamline our internal operations. So integrate the businesses, focus on cost cutting measures and all these things, because really we think that this is the key to having a business that will last over time.
I mean, that's the driver of sustainability, right? Make sure that you do your due diligence, cut costs where you can as you bring on these new teams and these new operations, before you go out and try to acquire more business and acquisitions, right? Because it's just going to further complicate your efforts. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, the thought of expansion and M&A, that's exciting. I mean, do I want to have a dispensary or vertical company in Arizona or Michigan? Absolutely. New Jersey? Sure. Like, absolutely. Those are exciting things. And, I think, shareholders get excited about that idea of rapid expansion. And I think, the thing that we've been very cognizant of and conscientious of is just growing at a moderate speed where we can control our expenses and just not getting outsized.
Yeah.
And again, all of that is just to say, because I think all of these things make you stronger for the long haul. And so if sort of step one was integrating the businesses and getting our house in order and being as efficient and profitable as possible, the next sort of pillar was fortifying our balance sheet and making sure that we were taking care of some short-term debt and just getting our balance sheet to a point where we're ready to sort of go into the next step. And so in doing so, we just termed out our debt, our short-term debt, with our CEO. So he was the proprietor and he's the guy who started Silver State Relief, Sonny Newman, who's now our CEO. And this guy's like the most excellent operator in the industry, I think. I mean, he comes from the automotive industry with very slim margins. So he looks at everything from an efficiency standpoint and doesn't, you know, get too overzealous in expenditures. So
what's as Sonny becoming on as the new CEO, like what is he committed to, say in his first three years, you know, in the position?
well, you know, he's like I said, he's been hyper focused on the integration of the business and controlling costs. And you know, I mean, we've brought our SG&A down dramatically, we've brought our overhead down dramatically, and all of these things, you know, trickle down to that balance sheet and the bottom line. And you know, I think that, you know, he sort of he views this as a business of cost management, you know, and his experience in running or operating in sort of low margin industries has just totally prepared him to tackle this.
Mm. There have been, when I posted the teaser for this episode, there was a lot of people that were excited, obviously, because C21 Investments is obviously a publicly traded company under the Canadian Securities Exchange, right?
Yeah.
So a number of questions came up, and I know you're touching on it here with Sonny coming in and talking about resolving some of this debt, you know, and whatnot. So specifically, what are some plans that y'all are focused on, say in 2021, in terms of debt resolution?
Yeah. So, you know, the kind of the first step in this fortifying our balance sheet was, you know, our biggest short-term debt was our final payment, you know, or the ultimate payment to Sonny for acquiring his business. And so, you know, I think we're down to just a little north of $15 million. It started at 30. So we've made significant payments. And I'll have you know too, like we're paying this debt through our internal operations. I mean, we haven't had to do a financing to, you know, to reduce this debt. So we're organically servicing his debt there. And the key difference is that, you know, the model up until a few weeks ago was we had a balloon payment due in the future to sort of settle off the debt that's owed to Sonny. And what he did graciously in the last couple of weeks is he termed out that debt to 3 years, which we've already been able to service it organically, as I said, but by stretching it out and amortizing that over 3 years, we've freed up even more cash flow, which is allowing us to do to answer your question, what does 21 look like?
Right.
Well, we're expanding our grow, as I mentioned. So we're investing about $6 million in building on our cultivation facility. And, you know, that's a pretty significant investment. And the reason why is, you know, it's a $6 million expenditure, but you know, we're anticipating that this is going to contribute about 7,500 more pounds of sellable flower.
Wow.
You know, to our current model,
Right.
which, you know, based on, you know, I mean, we just did a transaction last week. You know, so based on actual and current numbers, you know, we're projecting this is about a $17 million increase in sellable product for us. And so what's great though, and this is I think the thing that maybe some shareholders kind of glazed over, is that $17 million, because we already own the facility, we already have the management in place, we already have the PhD grower, we already have like the process in place. We're literally just expanding within our own footprint using our own money. So it's not dilutive to shareholders. And, you know, we're not going on taking some predatory loan that's, you know, harming us in the long term. So we're doing all this to, you know, increase our revenues somewhere in the neighborhood of $17 million. But the cost to produce that, aside from the build out, is about $2 million a year. So what that really means is the net is, this is $15 million to the bottom line that's coming through.
Right.
That's incredibly accretive for the investment. I think, you know, you're not having to buy a new building or a new piece of land, build a building, hire the staff, hire the management, hire all these crew, you know, build out all this infrastructure. We're able to do it within our own ecosystem. So it's pretty exciting.
No, that's huge. Yeah. And I appreciate you you going through that explanation, because I know that answers some of the questions that people had online. So I appreciate that. Another thing that I wanted to ask you about was, I know that C21 Investments has recently brought on some pretty big investor partners. To name a few: Wasatch Global Investors, JW Asset Management, CB1 Capital Management. So talk to me a little bit about those partnerships and what you see in terms of the value add there.
Well, I mean, I think you just saying those names out loud indicates the value add pretty quick. What it really says to me, being a guy who, obviously, I've been in this industry for a long time now, so I'm completely entrenched. And when you say those names, what it means to me is, holy crap, the big guys are starting to take notice of what we've got going on here. I think we've been kind of this sort of diamond in the rough, or we've kind of been in the shadows a little bit, because for the last year and a half, as we've been focused on internal efficiencies and integration, we haven't been promoting ourselves. And the reason why is we don't have something to say yet. So why are we going to go out and tout ourselves if we're sort of, we've got our pencils down and we're doing the hard math right now. So let's get through that, and then we can start telling our story. And so in such, we've sort of been, a very, very faint blip on the public co radar, in my opinion. And, I track this stuff pretty,
well,
probably minute by minute, and I'm not going to lie. Like I'm pretty well in tune with everything that's going on out there. And, I'm just like sitting on my hands, just like waiting to raise them and say, hey, we're doing this. And now we're kind of coming out and getting to say that. So
that's respectable though, because God, there's so many, my background is marketing and public relations, right? So you can totally tell when there's companies that are just issuing press releases to just issue press releases, right? And
absolutely.
Every little move they make, it's like, let's do a press release. And over time, people see right through that, and it's almost like you get into the situation of the boy who cried wolf, right? Where you're doing that so much to where you kind of turn your audience off. So that's
absolutely. Just to hit on that, I was going to say the boy who cried wolf too. So great, great reference. And I think that was sort of what we saw a lot in sort of the first round of companies going public in this space. And certainly, I'm not going to lie and say that we weren't sort of caught up in the keeping up with the Joneses, if you will, in that sort of time and space. And, where it was literally like, okay, well, what can we release next? What's the next bit of news? Because everyone was so hungry for this, just chasing this green dream. And man, that was an exciting time. And I think where C21 is a special unicorn there is that, we quickly realized this has to be a rational business to stand the test of time. And we can't just go out and blow cash and acquire all these things and spread ourselves too thin. I mean, that's a key thing right there. Had we purchased businesses in 17 different states, that's a huge aircraft carrier then that you're trying to navigate through shallow waters, right?
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in an emerging market that's not fully legal yet. So it's like, holy crap, let's right size things. Let's be on like a little, maybe a dinghy even. Maybe we're a little bit bigger than a dinghy, but like, let's be, more nimble. And so, I really appreciate sort of our senior management's commitment to that, and not chasing the shiny objects.
Right. And
it's so easy to do.
We saw those mistakes play out, right, in Canada, right, with a lot of these different companies who just started buying up assets, acquiring, and they their eyes got a little too big for their stomachs, right, at some point. And it's hard to operate those companies when you haven't, like you've talked about earlier, made those integrations and made sure that the business operations are operating efficiently, so that you can make those other moves.
Yeah, I mean, the big tell to me, and this is like, it's so funny talking about this because it feels like a decade ago, but really it was like 18 to 24 months ago. But the big tell to me was watching, the Canadian market go legal and following the press releases coming out from those Canadian companies. It was for literally for the first, I want to call it 18 months, it was about how much grow space do you have. So people were acquiring companies and grow spaces left and right. And we have 1 million square feet over here and 1 billion square feet over there. And we're going to cultivate on the moon. And it was just like, wait a minute, where's all this weed going to go? This is insane. And I think what we're seeing now, literally, some press releases that have come out in the last 14 days, you're starting to see people closing down these facilities and writing off, huge expenditures, because it wasn't self-sustainable, and not just from a business and dollars and cents, but like I think the available amount of cultivation space that was owned by Canadian public companies could have serviced the whole world 5 times over, and we're just not quite there yet. So
hey, you gotta give them credit for being the first, right, of the G7 nations to do it. But I mean,
absolutely,
the market's just not there yet globally, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, and look, everyone was caught up in the green rush. Yeah. I'm not throwing disrespect in any way, shape, or form, and we were just as caught up in it as anyone else. I think because we were a little bit smaller, and because we had some guys who've been in the game for a long time in terms of business, sort of helping guide this, we didn't get as caught off sides as some companies have. And so, I think back, rewinding the clock, 2 years, and we were talking about doing these big raises to expand. It's really bad that ultimately, because conversation today, where we're talking about 5 or 6 different more states and countries that were under our purview, but I don't think that we would have the same profitability story that we do today.
Right. No, hey, I mean, it sounds like you guys are making the right moves in terms of, you want to make sure that you're efficient and you're tackling your core competency first before expanding and moving into different areas and acquiring, right? You don't want to move too fast, because we've seen that play out, like we talked about earlier, in the Canadian markets.
Yeah. So I think that kind of taps into something else too, just circling back to kind of the 4 pillars of kind of how we've been operating recently, and not even recent, I mean, for the last 18 months. And, so I talked about streamlining our, integrating our businesses, fortifying the balance sheet, sort of addressing, our short-term debt. And then now those 2 things are effectively done. Then I told you about how we're expanding our cultivation, which is sort of our first, news that we've said in quite a while, about how we're starting to show growth, internally, organically derived growth. And then, I think what's more fascinating is when you start looking towards the future, you asked me about 21 and expansion and more dispensaries. And, I think those things are definitely on our radar. And one of the things that, we've been very disciplined, almost to an excruciating point. I mean, I certainly want the world to spin faster in this regard, is, working on this non-dilutive financing to grow our business, at a faster rate than what we can do internally. And we have been just, we've had our nose to the grindstone for the better part of a year, working on a couple opportunities that are coming close to fruition. And, despite what, obviously I'm a large shareholder, so I want this to happen as fast as humanly possible as well. But the thing that I can just say is that our disciplined approach, and the fact that we're not just grabbing at, the first offer of money coming through, because there's a lot, is just having this disciplined approach. We want to make sure that we're engaging the right financing option that is the least dilutive to our, well, I should say, is the most accretive to our shareholders. And so taking, these loans that are at predatory rates, and they're not predatory rates, it's just, it is what it is for a risky industry. But, taking money at 15% or 13% is incredibly expensive and ultimately not helpful to our shareholders. Mm-hmm. And so, I can fully appreciate, some folks wanting us to get that done faster and move quicker. But, we think that, this disciplined approach to acquiring this growth capital at a favorable rate is going to pay off, in dividends over the long term. So, that's where the excitement for me in 21 is looking towards, wrapping that up, and then, having a fortified balance sheet where we can actually go out and expand upon our business model, but not doing so at a rate where we're giving the majority of our proceeds, the net benefit of that, to the lender.
Right, right. No, that's absolutely the right approach. And I really look forward to just following C21 Investments progress come 2021. And I want to have you, Sky. I want to have you back on as things evolve, and as you guys continue to grow and expand, because what you guys are doing is exciting stuff. So
Cool. Well, I'd love the chance to come talk again. This has been fun.
absolutely. Yeah. And before we sign off, where can people find your website? And then I know you can throw out your ticker and all that kind of things.
Yeah, sure. We've got so our company's called C21 Investments, and our website is just cxxi.ca for Canada, which I love because it's 4 letters. It's pretty much the shortest domain name you can possibly have. And then of course our ticker just follows suit. It's CXXI, and for those in the US, it's CXXIF for foreign. And we're on the CSE, and pretty easily accessible. So we were recently included in a new ETF fund called MSOS. And so you can participate in that ETF as well, that is invested in our company.
Yes, and I've heard good things about that ETF, and it's pretty reasonably priced right now, I think, the shares. So check that out.
Yeah.
Sky, thank you so much again, man. Really enjoyed it.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on. This has been fun.
Yes, and thank you all for listening. Bye.